my experience wasn't terrible there, but the biology department didn't like much what I was doing, and they found ways to marginalize me. And we had a course in the history and philosophy of science, and I was away on sabbatical and came back and found that the course had been rearranged to make it impossible for me to participate. And there are things like that, but these weren't huge things. But I had a more significant experience that cost someone else more than me. I wrote an article in 2004 for a journal that was published adjacent to or out of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. The journal was edited by Richard Sternberg, who happens to be here at the conference. And he's fine.
Okay.
They've done everything to Sternberg that they can possibly do. But I didn't know Rick at the time, but I submitted the article. I had met him briefly at a conference and asked if I could approach him, and he said, well, of course it'd have to go through peer review, and which I thought was his way of saying no, but I thought I'd give it a shot, And he did, in fact, send the article out for peer review. It was an article about something in the biological evolution called the Cambrian explosion. It's the origin.
Actually, I say but maybe
the Cambrian explosion is a fascinating event in the history of life. It's the point in the fossil record where we find the first animal forms, and they come very suddenly or abruptly into the fossil record. And I argued that the Cambrian explosion did not just represent a problem with the origin of form. It wasn't just a problem of gaps in the fossil record, but that it was actually a problem of the origin of information, because we now know that to build an animal, you need information. You certainly need information in the form of instructions encoded in the DNA.
These have been some of the most interesting presentations here, and I really wish we could put the entire presentation online, but just maybe elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, yeah, and one thing I could say about that is that on our website at Discovery Institute, actually it's if you go to my webpage, it's signatureinthecell.com, there's a full presentation that I made for the C-SPAN book TV about the case I make on this, so people could
Signatureinthecell.com.
Yeah, signatureinthecell.com. Right. But in any case, the article I wrote was about the Cambrian explosion. I argued that the need for information, the massive amount of information necessary to produce these new animal forms, was something that defied the creative powers of the Darwinian mechanism. And instead, I argued that it also, because of what we know from experience, that is that information always comes from an intelligent source, that we might well be looking at evidence of intelligent design. The article went through peer review. It came back with very thorough comments. There were some critique. I was asked to make some amendments and corrections. I followed through, responded to the correction or to the criticisms, sent in the corrected version. It was accepted. It was published in the summer of 2004. And for about a week, there was it seemed everything was fine. And then suddenly, just the lid came off at the Smithsonian. Sternberg came under extreme pressure. I was at the Discovery Institute at the time. We're an independent research institute. We are addressing these questions as part of what we do. So there was no possibility of persecution of me. But in fact, the Wall Street Journal article said that, the shame of it is that Sternberg has experienced all this retribution. But the heretic is this guy Meyer out in Seattle. But in any case, Sternberg's office was taken away from him. His keys, his access to scientific samples. He was eventually demoted. And there were the Office of Special Counsel, a government watchdog organization of the federal government, which investigated his case, found that there had been a concerted effort to spread disinformation about him as a way of getting him to resign. And there were even
concerted effort by whom?
By the senior officials in the museum. He was transferred out from under a longtime supervisor to someone that was known to be hostile. They, in every way possible, made his life difficult. And at one point, the tempers were running so high that apparently the head of the council that oversaw the publication of the journal told Sternberg not to come into the museum. He couldn't guarantee his personal safety. It was that kind of intense situation. So
he couldn't guarantee. So there were death threats.
No death threats, but it was just tempers were running high.
Right. So they thought spontaneous violence against this guy.
Someone might, I don't know, push or shove in the hallway. I don't know what he had in mind, but he said, "Don't come to this meeting," and so the science press took this up. It was, there was articles in Science and Nature, Chronicle of Higher Education, and then the mainstream press got wind of it. There was a big expose in the Washington Post and then in the Wall Street Journal. Sternberg ended up on the O'Reilly factor talking about what had happened to him. But this is, kind of indicative of the some of the pressures that are on scientists who
Right.
want to. I mean, at this point, Sternberg had made no public declaration of support for intelligent design. He had been known for several years to be skeptical about mainstream Darwinism, which made him open-minded enough to consider the article. But this is what scientists fear.
What
It's
does
this
this
kind of
say
thing that
about the
scientists fear.
process of peer review? Because everyone, well, not everyone, but quite a number of people will say, but this stuff isn't being published in peer-reviewed journals. Do you think this might be? I'm guessing that you think this might be a big clue about why.
Yeah.
why
Well,
it's
I
not
mean,
published in
it's a
peer-reviewed
leading question,
It
but I
is a leading
appreciate the way
question,
you're leading
but-
me. Well, in 2004, when the article was published, the main argument against including any discussion of intelligent design in university classes or public school science classrooms had been that intelligent design isn't scientific because it hasn't been peer-reviewed. There's no peer-reviewed scientific articles. After the article was published, the argument changed, and it was that intelligent design shouldn't have been published because it's not scientific. So it's a perfectly tight little circle. It's not scientific because it hasn't been published, and then once it was published, shouldn't have been published because it's not scientific. But actually, that argument I think is no longer. First of all, it's a procedural argument. You don't assess the quality of ideas merely by the peer review system. The peer review system is inherently conservative. It can exclude ideas which are outside of a mainstream. It doesn't mean they might not be very good. The peer review system has only existed in science effectively since the end of World War II. There were a lot of important things that were discovered in science before things were peer reviewed in the modern sense. Darwin's theory of the origin of species was never peer reviewed. The book was never peer reviewed. That wasn't the way science was done in that time.
I have a question for you. Many of the things that you're thinking about and discussing are highly technical.
Yeah.
They do require a background in biology or information technology to understand at least the presentations
Right.
that we saw today. For ordinary people who are curious about this, if peer review isn't a good way of discerning who's got a good idea and who doesn't, what kind of gatekeeper can you imagine? What would help people to figure out who's worth listening to and who's
These
great?
are great questions, Claire. And one I think innovation in scientific publishing has been the kind of open sourcing on with the more internet-based journals, where the comments of the peer reviewers are included at the bottom of the paper, and then other people are able to comment. Peer review is a very good system when it's checking for factual accuracy. When it becomes a mode of enforcing ideological conformity, it has problems. And so one of the things that is incumbent upon us in developing a new scientific research approach, a new theory, is to be very concerned and vigilant about quality control. And so we have a new journal called Biocomplexity. It has a very, I think, prestigious editorial board, 32 fantastic scientists, some of whom are members of national academies in their own countries. And we have a rigorous peer review system.
Well,
but
we're just calling into question why certain things are prestigious and why they're
Yeah,
not, and
right.
whether that's a good way to judge whether the idea is worth your time.
Yeah, well, I mean, peer review has been sort of the gold standard, but it's not infallible, and it's not infallible because people have biases and they have agendas, and they can use it as a way of enforcing ideological conformity and therefore excluding potentially new, very important ideas in science.
What intellectual standards would you suggest generally to people who are trying to make sense of this issue? What tests should they subject what they're reading to figure out, does this make sense or
Well,
not?
that's really in some ways the point of my book, is that there are standard methods of reasoning in science. And first of all, you want basic standards like scientific accuracy. And could I just say one thing too about the couple questions back, is that there are now about three dozen or more. I think we haven't posted all of the are we still on camera?
I think we should test the sound and maybe
stop.
break this into
Okay.
two, because it's going to, I think we're
Oh,
gonna have
because
trouble.
we're not
All right,
broadcasting now.
No,
Okay,
we're just
yeah.
recording. So this is part one, and then part two will follow.
Okay.